Hello and welcome to North Country Matters. My name is Donna Seymour. I'm a member of the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters, one of the civic partners for this show. My guest today is Dustin Bowman, who's a member of the Canton Sustainability Committee. He's here to talk with us about the Canton Pollinator Trail Initiative. Dustin, welcome to North Country Matters. With spring just around the corner, this is the perfect time to start talking about setting up pollinator-friendly spaces, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. We haven't moved out of the snow too much, although we haven't got a lot this year. And I think it's like helping people think about their gardens. I don't know about you, Donna, but I've been kind of puttering on around the yard all winter, which feels like, maybe this is the year that I'll have a little bit of a head start.
Well, of course, there's always April, which can be the cruelest month up here, and that's ahead of us. So Dustin, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became involved and a member of the Canton Sustainability Committee.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. My job, I guess my profession, I work for the state of Vermont, but I live in Canton. I moved back here 4 years ago, and I grew up in town. And so I'm privileged to manage an AmeriCorps program over there that's environmentally focused. Um, yeah, and thinking about this conversation, I sort of put together something. So if your viewers will permit, I'll just kind of read off some of the thoughts that I had. So I've always loved plants and growing things. That's always been true of me. Being raised in Canton on a large plot of land, we had a lot of gardens and our own produce, and we watched the field get mowed every year, and we took for granted the incredible abundance of life that was around us. And if I look at nature through those childhood eyes, I see, these lovely dark groves of green hemlock and red alder in the winter, and I see thick swarms of lightning bugs and butterflies and bees on every spring and summer flower, and fields of color in the autumn from my feet basically to beyond the horizon line. Um, and so what I realize now, and when I go back to those woods and sort of think about those childhood experiences there, I realize now that I was forming an identity based on conservation ethics and design, and it was sort of happening subconsciously in the background as I was like building, forts and running around the woods. And so I visit those same woods now, and I feel really, really lucky that they're still intact. And I feel intrinsically that I know in nature, everything is sort of looking after its own needs and in the service of all. So everything is patterned to benefit the whole, but not without taking care of its own needs first. So this is the rhythm of life. And in the woods and the wetlands of my youth, I was taught those lessons, and I feel very fortunate. So because of that education, I believe it's possible to meet all of our human needs while still restoring soils, ecosystems, and community. And living in a rural place, as everybody knows, can sometimes create a false sense that the global issues that we're facing are not our problem, perhaps, to solve. However, the ways in which we interact with the natural world around us can have profound implications on the systems we depend on for survival. So simply put, without pollinators, our ability to maintain a healthy and diverse diet is dramatically reduced. We may not be able to turn the tide in the climate and biodiversity fight, but we can certainly contribute to its healing and restoration in profound and moving ways. So we can build healthy soil, we can build wealth in our community, and even rediscover a sense of purpose and belonging. And the process, this process, this whole thing is what led me to becoming involved on my own road once I moved back to the area, through things like litter pickup, turtle rescue in the spring, and eventually pollinator garden installation. And through those things, I found a really inspiring community, and I'm fortunate enough to know them, and they let me run with ideas, and they joined me in the madness.
Well, that's kind of a perfect little segue to my question is about the work of the committee, because that committee is doing some really innovative things, and it's a great model for any community to follow, isn't it?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've been a part of the committee for the past 3 years or so. I was transitioning away from serving as secretary of the county's Environmental Management Council, which some of your viewers might be aware of from past guests. And the Canton Sustainability Committee is a wonderful group of people. So they tackle issues big and small, and that really appealed to me. It felt like being connected to that group allowed me insight into some of the decision making that was happening, impacting the area around me that I cared about. So it's an inspiring group of people. They're passionate about supporting Canton as a climate smart and resilient community, a community that composts our food scraps, who recognizes our rights of the rivers around us and engages our elected officials to advocate for initiatives that will improve the quality of life for residents and protect the natural environment.
Yeah, I know. And we did have last year, we did have a guest from the Environmental Management Council on, and he talked about the fact that Canton had was such a great model community, and he hoped other North Country communities would use the Canton model for their own communities. As I understand it, the idea of a pollinator trail came out of a committee meeting last fall when members were talking about no-mow zones and the work you're doing on developing a pollinator garden at the intersection of the Boyden Roads and the Farns Road in South Canton. Tell us a little bit about how the idea developed from that conversation.
Yeah, it was really fortuitous. I think as I was kind of walking around picking up litter on the side of the road through the pandemic, that was one of my activities. Everybody had their own. Um, I noticed that there was an area of just grass in between the intersection of two roads. So it's sort of this island, and it would get mowed every year, twice a year by the town. Sometimes they would look like they maybe applied some pesticides even to some of the signage in there. And it just always felt like kind of it was like calling to me in a way. So and it kind of had everything. So when I started thinking about what that space could look like in terms of one that supports life, one that supports biodiversity and beauty, and gives the community a source of pride, it really became apparent to me that that site had it all. So it had first an engaged and supported group of neighbors. It had a built-in waterer who was one of the land like abutters. Her name is Carol, and she was like all about watering it whenever I asked, which was really cool. The area was like, if we could plant it up right, like it wouldn't impact any safety concerns. So the approval of the current town supervisor, Stephen Smith, was crucial in getting this going. And that was really like empowering to feel like the town was behind this too. So a group of us starting last year started going out to the site and prepping it. So we decided to build it in a lasagna style garden method. So basically that means that we're attempting to build soil on site without the like any kind of like outside additives. So aside from cardboard and wood chips. So the site, because it's an intersection in the town, was pretty sandy soil. So we started layering cardboard and wood chips. We formed 4 layers over this patch, and then we planted mushroom spawn. This is like maybe a little bit of a deep dive, but it's like wine cap mushrooms. And what that mycelium layer does is feed on the carbon in the wood chips, and it breaks it down so that the soil tilth increases over time. And so what we saw last year was these mushrooms in the fall started to really sprout. So like you drive by that site, there'd be all these like funny, like cartoony looking mushrooms there. And I got really excited because I started going over there and noticing that the soil was building before my eyes. We also had a local school group, the Little River School, join in the fun. And so they built and designed and painted these beautiful, bright wildflowers out of plywood. And we planted them at the site as like an indicator to the local residents that this was going to be an area of flowering shrubs and plants soon. But in the meantime, here's something pretty to look at. So those were like 9 and 10-year-olds over at the Little River School that did that. And yeah, just sort of like all of the things, the tendrils that came from this. I call it Canton social mycelium. It was really inspiring to see.
You know, that's such an important concept, is that you included the neighbors, you brought in school kids. It became a community building project as well as a project to attract pollinators. So there are so many, there's as many layers to this of that as there's your lasagna layers to improve the soil, isn't there?
I think I'm getting a little hungry.
There you
And
go.
and so the connection to the sustainability committee became like they became aware of that, and they were also working on their own pollinator garden off of Main Street in Canton. And so we started talking, and then this idea of a sort of a larger pollinator, like a North Country pollinator trail, started to emerge. So some of the ideas that we have around this, and we're just in the beginning stages and definitely need input and help, but we're looking at creating like an interactive map or a guidebook of sites across our area on both public and private lands. So that would include locations, well planted, perhaps natural observations, which is always really cool. And then whether like the public would have access there. So there's also, sort of creating connections between us and the natural world is something that like I think this would help do. It would help support a growth in biodiversity in our area and help us like maybe change the conversation around land use and management that's currently being deployed. We're sort of building local momentum with things like this too. Like each time a site would be identified and pop up on our guide, I think that would help create this sort of community-driven change and healthy soils and greater biodiversity. And then hopefully we can link to groups that are acting in the area. 80K Action is one, like up in the Adirondacks. They've been doing pollinator work for a while now. But locally here at home, we've got Nature Up North, we've got Garden Share, we have Cornell Cooperative Extension, the St. Lawrence Land Trust, among others. So it's really amazing when you start doing one thing in your backyard, basically, it can turn into this like really rewarding experience, and you can meet a lot of people by doing it.
Yes, and the idea of pollinator trails is something that you can actually go online and do a little research on that, and they're all over the place. States have them, localities have them. There's even interactive maps for the whole country. So it's the sort of thing that is really beginning to take off. One of the ideas about the no-mow zones that's been slowly gaining ground around the country as municipalities recognize that mowing and spraying pesticides kills many beneficial plants that actually attract pollinators, that we need to ensure our food supply. And every once in a while, I'll read a story about a state which has told its Department of Transportation, stop spraying and stop mowing, and they're actually letting natural world take over on the sides of these roads. And it makes such a huge difference, not just in terms of the visual pleasure of driving down a road, but also in terms of attracting the insects, attracting the butterflies and the birds that are feeding in these areas, doesn't it?
Yeah, I love that story too, and it reminds me that like to remind everyone that it doesn't take much to attract pollinators to your yard or to feed the caterpillars that will eventually become pollinating insects. Um, Bee balm, sunflowers, Jerusalem artichoke, coneflowers, even like popular herbs and milkweed, like anything like that you plant will help the pollinators in your area. A couple of years ago, I let my yard go and just one summer and just to see what would happen. And Donna, I was like amazed at like the diversity of the bee populations alone that showed up. I mean, I'm thinking we observed at least 25 species of bees, and there were things growing in my yard that I never knew were there. Like I was just mowing them down forever. And when I let it go, like things got really interesting. And that's not for everybody, but everybody has, or maybe everybody has access to like a small plot somewhere that they can help. But if you don't have access to a large yard or even like the ability to decide a mowing strategy where you live, organizations like the ones that I mentioned before are so vital. So you can become involved in pollinator support through different initiatives. And that's what's so important about the Canton Sustainability Committee is because it gives people a platform to become involved in that community and to help bring forward a world of more nature and more birdsong and more beauty.
Yeah, there's I've been reading the last couple of years about no mow Mays, and just don't mow your lawn in May and let it develop naturally. And then when you do start mowing again, don't mow it right tight to the earth, but actually leave a few inches, and you can plant things like clover that are a low uh, growth type of plant, but still
Hmm.
attract the pollinators. So as you develop the pollinator trail, and you've talked about some of the spaces you want to connect, how will you actually identify the plants on the trail and the pollinators so that you can have this very important community education aspect of the trail and really put it in people's minds about what they understand what they're seeing and why what they're seeing is so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hope is that we can begin connecting small plots like the one on Boyden Road and the one on Main Street, um, and other places that are seen as sort of maybe currently as inconveniences, like that require gas and mowing and hours of work time. Um, and if we can identify those spaces with the help of residents in town in the area, then we can start to look at how can we grow this idea so that like maybe we can identify several road islands like the one on the Boyden and Farnes Road that would be perfect for community projects like these, but would also be amazing, to work with like landowners so that they might begin uploading their own pollinator space to the trail map and like feeling part of that larger movement. I think there's also huge potential for this with the colleges and also with outreach to local farmers as well. We've seen, nature is resilient and it will bounce back if we give it some space to do that. So all conservation is really education and communication, and both are really hard. Both are challenging, and I think they're also worth doing and feel really gratifying as you're doing it and building trust and relationships. And so I think if we want to see Canton become a leader in protecting pollinators, if we want that to be part of our future identity and our current identity, we can do it. And I think it's all possible.
So one of the things that you'll need to do as you go forward is look for partners, either organizations or student groups or whatever. This is going to take a lot of hands to implement. It isn't the sort of thing that you do overnight. So how will people get a better sense of community ownership and pride as they participate in this process?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And that small space on the Boyden and Farnes Road, it doesn't look like much, but it takes a lot of effort. And I think what we're seeing is that there's already signs that the town of Canton is getting more and more behind supporting pollinator spaces, which is really encouraging. Also, there's this inspiring project happening that your viewers may not know about. At SLU, there's an initiative called the Indigenous Peoples Trail. So a group of students there are working with some faculty, some community members such as myself, to remove invasive plants and replace them with native plants that were in the area that were used as food staples, for the people that were here before, long before. Sorry, Silas Wright was in the area. So I think it's important to note that anyone who's interested can get involved in their own yard, on their own decks, and their own patios, those sort of spaces, and make sure that the plants that they're using are organic and pesticide free, of course. Especially watch out for the plants that have neonicotinoids, which is a class of chemical that can be really harmful to insects, especially pollinators. They've been responsible for driving down populations of insects greatly in recent years. Um, but I think we're seeing sort of this grassroots community spring up, and I think it's like a lot of people are thinking about this, but the pollinator trail would help us all get connected together. And yeah, I think that momentum that we're feeling around this is evidence that people are really, they love pollinators, they love supporting nature. There's something really gratifying and sort of eternal with watching things grow and then supporting the natural world around us that we all appreciate. It's one of the main reasons that we live here.
Yeah,
So it's
you're
been great to see the community sort of come out for this, but I think there's a long way to go, and I'm excited to see what the next steps might be.
You're exactly right about why people like living in the North Country, because we are much closer to nature and we do have the wide open spaces and access to uh, the water, whether it's the local rivers or ponds and streams and the forests and what all. And for a lot of people in the country, they aren't as exposed to that as we are, and it's harder to appreciate what you don't have. But we certainly do appreciate what we do have. You know, Dustin, one of the things that came out about pollinators last year, there was a study that indicated that the global loss of pollinators was already causing 500,000 early deaths a year by reducing the supply of healthy food, because of course the pollinators are critical to the food supply. And these researchers considered that deaths from heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and some cancers, all of which can be reduced with healthy diets, were being caused by the fact that the food supply is not as healthy as it could be. And this was actually the first study to quantify the human health toll of insufficient wild pollinators. So what this points out is a real disconnect about how decisions are being made and the real world health and environmental results of those decisions. And you've just talked about how in Canton, more and more people are beginning to appreciate the pollinators. This is really important as our decision makers continue to make decisions. They really need to understand that connection, don't they?
Yeah, I think it's easy to feel like things don't impact us up here, and to also sort of take for granted the nature that we have around us. But anyone who grew up here, or has been in the area for the last 20 years, they've seen the changes with their own eyes. Like I like to think of it as like the windscreen effect, like sort of when you're driving down the road 20 years ago, you'd have to clean your windshield when you got home after a trip. And now, like when I'm driving for hours, it seems like I rarely have insects hitting my window. So um, it might not seem like we're losing insects, but it is happening. It's happening all around us, and the impacts of that are profound. I think it's hard to wrap your mind around what sort of uh, what that would mean for the life that we've sort of come to expect here. So we might not have the ability to turn everything around, but we can certainly like put our foot in the ground and say, like, we want to have a more regenerative agricultural system. We want to have more community spaces that feature pollinators. We want to have our identity as a community built around this connection to the natural world. We are nature, and nature is us. And Canton wouldn't be Canton without the river running through it. And I think we do ourselves a disservice by turning our back on that which has given us so much. So to support nature feels really good. You make friends, you get outside, and then yeah, the healthy diet is such a big part of longevity and supporting our farmers. So if we can, build a healthy pollinator population back through our actions at the town level, at the local level, I think it's a really hopeful future for everyone.
You know, many people feel overwhelmed and anxious about climate change. And if you just pointed out, if anybody who's lived here for any length of time, we've seen changes. And many of the things that are happening seem to be moving much more rapidly than anybody ever thought they would, and in directions we can't predict. So sometimes it feels like there's nothing you can personally do to prevent climate disaster or to protect the places you live. But things like the pollinator trail really give people hope, don't they?
Yeah, and I was feeling this sort of climate anxiety is what I call it. But and I think the antidote to that is action. It's being involved, and that's what's so great about this area is like we have a lot of people that care, and if you show initiative, if you show any kind of like passion for something, you'll be able to find others that are as passionate about that issue as you, and um, that can help relieve the sort of the depression that we feel when we live through a winter like we just had. Um, as these changes are happening, the identity that we've all known for so long is also shifting, and I think we have to recognize that that's a really heavy weight to bear, and we might not be like thinking about it every day, but subconsciously it's weighing on everyone here. So if you're feeling like hopeless, you feel like maybe there's not anything that we can do, contact the Canton Sustainability Committee and we'll put you to work. And there's just no better feeling than getting your hands in the soil and just, helping creatures survive. And that's true of the pollinator trail, but it's also, you can do it in all sorts of different ways too. So if you've got an idea, you'd like to get involved more, please reach out to the Sustainability Committee in Canton and we'd love to chat with you.
That's great. So how exactly do people connect with the committee? What's the best way?
That's a good question. I wish I knew the answer. So I would go on the town website. The Sustainability Committee is located there. Yeah, we might have to link to that, Donna, but the director of the Sustainability Committee is a great woman named Kathy Schrady. And so she's recently taken over the helms from Ann Heidenreich, who was the sustainability director for a long time. So if you could reach out to me, I'm not sure that you would want to directly, but I don't know. I could share my email now, or we could do that later.
I can actually put the link to the Sustainability Committee on the Canton website right in the show notes. So that will give people the a place to go to get started on this process.
Thanks for
But
the rescue, Donna.
yeah, that's okay. Listen, Dustin, thank you so much for your time today and for your story, because your story is actually a lot of people's story in terms of, having grown up here and enjoyed it in one way and then watched the changes in the last 20 or 30 years that have happened. Some of us have been watching these changes for a lot more than 20 or 30 years. And it's important that we do what we can where we are to make
Hmm.
to make a difference and to make change that we want to see happen. And the fact that you can do it through a community with your neighbors and with people that maybe you don't know now, but you'll meet through this process is really important, because that really helps to engender that sense of community and place that makes life so much more worth living.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a saying in permaculture, sometimes the problem is the solution. So we'll see you out in the garden.
All right, that sounds like a plan. Thank you so much. I want to remind folks that uh, these conversations are a production of North Country Matters. This show is a civic collaboration between the St. Lawrence County League of Women Voters and the Potsdam Public Library. Until next time, remember, our North Country matters.